5 years, that's how long I quietly funneled money every month into my parents' mortgage account, like clockwork, without skipping a beat. No fuss, no asking for thanks, no grand speeches. Just the steady click of the online transfer and the hope that my little contribution would mean something. Something like a secure roof for the family, peace of mind for mom and dad, or maybe even a promise of fairness someday. It started simply enough. A casual conversation over coffee where dad mentioned how tight things were after his early retirement, and mom hinted at wanting to keep the house no matter what. I didn't hesitate. It felt natural to help. After all, this was my family. Blood is thicker than water, right? I told myself it was temporary. Just a few years until they got back on their feet. But as months turned to years, I became the silent financial backbone, juggling my own bills, rent, and unexpected expenses while channeling a significant chunk of my paycheck to keep that mortgage ticking. What they didn't see was the quiet exhaustion behind the screens where I logged into their bank accounts. The mental math I did when choosing between paying for my own car repairs or helping with theirs. The texts I never sent asking for help because family comes first, even if it hurts. Every month, I'd get a small thank you smile at best, sometimes nothing at all. Not that I was keeping score, but sometimes a little acknowledgement wouldn't have hurt. Instead, I got used to being invisible, like a ghost paying bills behind the scenes, hoping the house would be a safe haven for all of us. 5 years of this wasn't easy. I sacrificed vacations, late nights out with friends, and little luxuries that I convinced myself I didn't need. All for a house that should have felt like home to all of us. But as you probably guessed, the story takes a sharp left here. Because despite all this, that house, well, it wasn't exactly mine to claim or even my name on the deed. And that's when the real journey began. It's funny how, when you're the one quietly footing the bill, you tend to notice things most people don't. Like the little ways your sister's life seemed to get easier, like she was somehow skating on thin ice with snow boots on, while I was stuck wearing flip-flops on the same slippery path. And yeah, I'll admit it, I started to feel that slow burn of resentment. Not the loud, angry kind that makes you want to throw things, but the quiet, simmering kind that curls around your thoughts like a shadow you can't shake. She was always the golden child. At least that's how it felt from where I was standing. The effortless charm, the smiling way she could talk her way out of chores or conversations that got too serious. I'd come home after a long day, and she'd be lounging with her friends in the living room, feet kicked up, no worries about rent, bills, or, you guessed it, mortgage payments. Somehow, it seemed like the world just handed her everything on a silver platter, including the family's approval. I tried to be fair. I told myself she worked hard in her own way, college, job, social life. But the deeper truth was harder to swallow. She wasn't carrying the weight the same way I was. The financial responsibility was like an invisible chain wrapped around me, tightening slowly with every passing month. The little things got to me. The casual way she'd borrow the car without asking. The weekends she spent at friends' houses while I was scrambling to cover unexpected expenses. And the way our parents seemed to look at her with that soft, indulgent gaze, like she was their precious project, while I felt more like the dependable fixer-upper. Of course, no one said any of this out loud. Family dinners were a minefield of polite smiles and half-jokes. I kept my mouth shut, not wanting to rock the boat. After all, this was my home too, or so I thought. There was a moment once, a small but telling crack in the facade, when I realized how deep this imbalance ran. It was during a quiet Saturday morning coffee when I overheard a conversation between mom and dad. They were talking about taking care of my sister, about making sure she had a place to come back to no matter what. The words stung, But what hurt more was the unspoken message. I was, well, less of a priority. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about love, fairness, and respect, things that aren't always counted in dollars but hurt just as much. And yet, I said nothing, because what choice did I have? I was the one keeping the mortgage paid, the one making sacrifices. I wanted to believe that loyalty and sacrifice meant something, that fairness would eventually catch up. But deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was the fool in this story. And this was only the beginning. The family dinners, holiday gatherings, and casual visits, the scenes where the surface seemed calm but underneath, there was this slow, simmering tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. You know how families are. Everyone smiles, cracks jokes, but there's always something lurking in the silence between the words. For me, those moments became a daily exercise in walking on eggshells. You'd think that since I was the one keeping the mortgage afloat, the gratitude would at least be genuine. But no, it was more complicated than that. Sometimes, it felt like I was the invisible scaffolding holding the entire family structure up, and instead of thanks, I got passive-aggressive comments, subtle digs, and the occasional cold shoulder. My sister, she played the role of the carefree youngest sibling flawlessly, even if she was older by 2 years. She had this knack for deflecting awkward questions with a smile, and whenever I brought up money or responsibilities, she'd suddenly have somewhere to be or a new excuse to bail out. Meanwhile, our parents nodded along but never really addressed the elephant in the room. I remember one Christmas dinner in particular, lights twinkling, carols softly playing in the background, when Dad made an offhand comment about how some things just aren't worth arguing over. The room went quiet, and my sister shot me a quick glance that said, "Don't make a scene." But that phrase, "not worth arguing over," felt like a slap in the face. Was 5 years of mortgage payments really not worth a mention? Mom sat quietly, stirring her mashed potatoes like she was trying to dissolve the tension in the gravy. She avoided my eyes. I wondered if she felt guilty, or if she thought I was overreacting. The whole situation felt like a chess game with invisible moves and hidden strategies, but I wasn't sure who was winning, or if anyone really was. There were nights I lay awake, replaying conversations in my head, trying to decode the subtext behind every word, every glance. The silence in the house became heavier, the air thicker with unspoken resentments. I tried talking once or twice, hoping to clear the air, but every time, the talks ended with vague promises or more silence. You know that feeling when you want to scream, but all that comes out is a sigh? That was me. And yet, amidst all this, the house remained standing, thanks mostly to me. But that wasn't enough to keep the family whole. Not when fairness, respect, and love seemed to have slipped quietly out the back door. It was clear to me that things were shifting. That invisible fault line was starting to crack wide open, but the real earthquake was yet to come. You know that moment when the rug is pulled so hard from under your feet that you swear the floor just disappeared? Yeah, that's exactly how it felt the day my parents dropped the bombshell. They were giving the house to my sister, just like that. No warning, no discussions, no, "Hey, let's talk about this." Just a simple, cold fact delivered over dinner like it was the most normal thing in the world. We were sitting around the kitchen table, plates half empty, the usual hum of casual chatter filling the air. Dad cleared his throat and said, "We've decided to transfer the house to your sister. It's time to settle things properly." Mom nodded silently, eyes fixed on her glass. My sister, ever the picture of innocence, smiled as if this was the best news she'd heard all day. I blinked, trying to process the words. Did I hear that right? Was this some kind of sick joke? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep calm, even though inside my chest felt like it had just been stomped on. For what? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The mortgage, the money I've been paying for 5 years. Dad shrugged like it was some mundane, bureaucratic detail. We're doing what's best for the family. Your sister needs stability right now. I wanted to laugh or scream, maybe both. Stability. Like the stability I was supposed to have, after years of sacrifice and silently shouldering the burden. Apparently, that didn't count. Mom finally spoke up, her voice soft but firm. It's just how things have to be. We appreciate everything you've done, but this is our decision. I stared at them, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper. I wanted to argue, to throw every ounce of frustration and hurt at them. But instead, I felt this strange numbness settle over me, like my heart was trying to protect itself from shattering. My sister glanced my way, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, quickly masked by a sweet smile. It was as if she'd won some invisible game I hadn't even realized we were playing. The dinner ended awkwardly, the air thick with unspoken accusations. I excused myself, leaving the room before I could say something I'd regret. Walking out into the cool night air, the realization hit me. This house, the place I'd helped keep safe, was no longer mine to claim. It belonged to her now, and no amount of quiet sacrifice seemed to matter. That night, as I stared at the dark sky, I wondered how families could tear themselves apart over walls and roofs, things that were supposed to shelter us, not divide us. And so, with the house suddenly out of reach, I knew I had a choice. Accept the injustice or fight back in my own way. The days following that dinner felt like walking through a fog. I needed answers, something concrete to grasp onto amid the confusion and hurt. So naturally, I tried to talk to my parents. Because, maybe it was just a misunderstanding, or there was some reason I hadn't yet heard. Right? Spoiler alert, no such luck. I started with Mom. One afternoon, while she was folding laundry, I asked gently, "Can we talk about the house? I just want to understand why the decision was made." Her hands paused mid-fold, and she gave me that look, part exhaustion, part guilt, part resignation. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "it's complicated. Your sister needs this more right now." Complicated, I thought. It sounded like a dodge, a polite way of saying, "We don't want to deal with this conversation." But I pressed on, hoping for more. "I've been paying the mortgage all this time. Doesn't that count for anything? Doesn't fairness matter?" She sighed and shook her head. "It's not about money anymore. Sometimes families have to make tough choices." Tough choices? I'd call it tough luck for me. Next up was Dad, who was predictably less forthcoming. I found him in his study, shuffling papers. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Dad, why wasn't I told earlier? Why didn't we talk about this before the decision was made?" He looked up, eyes tired but firm. "We thought it was best to handle it quietly, avoid unnecessary conflict." Quietly? Avoid conflict? At this point, I wanted to laugh or cry, or both. I felt like I was chasing shadows, grasping at half-truths and excuses that barely scratched the surface. Every conversation left me more frustrated, more alone. I even reached out to my sister, hoping she might offer some clarity or at least empathy. But she dodged my questions, deflecting with smiles and vague reassurances that it's all for the best. The silence from my family was deafening. It was like they'd built a wall between us, brick by brick, leaving me standing on the wrong side. I began to question everything: the sacrifices I'd made, the loyalty I'd shown, and whether I had been taken for granted all along. But in that confusion, something else started to grow, a determination not to be erased or forgotten. Because when family lets you down, sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. The cold truth finally sank in one quiet evening as I sat alone with my bank statements spread across the kitchen table. Each transaction was a stitch in a tapestry of sacrifice, 5 years of monthly mortgage payments made in good faith. But the reality? That house wasn't mine. Not even close. I'd always assumed that my contributions were building something real, something lasting for me too. Yet here I was, facing a title deed that bore only my sister's name. It felt like finding out you've been paying rent for an apartment you don't live in, except this was worse. This was family. I started running the numbers, obsessively comparing what I'd paid against the equity and ownership records. The math was cruelly clear. I'd poured thousands of dollars into a property that legally belonged to someone else. And my parents, they had knowingly allowed it. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was the principle, the sense of betrayal that gnawed at my insides. I had trusted them. I had believed that love and fairness would guide their decisions, but they had chosen a different path. My mind raced through every interaction, every conversation, looking for signs I might have missed. Was I naive? Blind? Or had I simply been the family's convenient safety net, their silent benefactor without a seat at the table? There were moments of anger, of course. Times when I wanted to storm into their home and demand answers, but the weight of family ties held me back. It's strange how love can sometimes chain you as tightly as resentment. I also realized this financial betrayal wasn't just a matter of numbers. It was a test of loyalty, a power play disguised as care. By giving the house to my sister, they'd shifted the family dynamics, unbalancing years of unspoken rules. And somewhere deep inside, a small flame of resolve flickered to life. I wasn't going to let this slide quietly. Because when you've been invisible for too long, sometimes the only way forward is to make yourself impossible to ignore. At some point, when the weight of family betrayal starts pressing down on you, you realize that carrying it alone is a recipe for breaking. So I started reaching out, quietly, cautiously, to friends I trusted, people who could listen without judgment and maybe offer a fresh perspective on the mess I was in. It wasn't easy spilling the details. There's always that stubborn part of you that wants to keep family issues private, to hold onto some shred of dignity. But when you're faced with this kind of unfairness, especially when you're the one who kept the house afloat, you quickly learn that bottling it up only makes it worse. I remember the first conversation vividly. Over coffee at a dimly lit cafe, I laid it all out. The years of mortgage payments, the sudden house transfer to my sister, and the deafening silence from my parents. My friend's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, they just handed the house over without even talking to you? That's insane. Their words gave me permission to feel what I'd been pushing down: hurt, anger, confusion. They didn't sugarcoat things. They called it what it was: unfair, even cruel. From there, I started sharing the story with a few others, people who had their own family drama stories. Surprisingly, the more I talked, the more I realized I wasn't alone. Friends shared tales of similar betrayals, of feeling invisible or taken for granted by their own families. Some had stories of lawsuits, others of quiet cutoffs and cold shoulders. Hearing these stories was strangely comforting. It helped me see the bigger picture. Families are complicated, messy webs of love, resentment, duty, and disappointment. And sometimes, the people you expect to protect you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But it also made me think, maybe this was more than just a personal battle. Maybe this was about standing up for what's right, even if it meant shaking the foundations of the family I thought I knew. I started jotting down ideas, weighing options, and letting the fire inside me grow from silent embers into something I couldn't ignore. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's the steady reclaiming of your own power. When I finally confronted my sister about the whole mess, I half expected tears, guilt, maybe even an apology. Instead, I got a masterclass in evasion and deflection. She greeted my concerns like a seasoned politician dodges tough questions, smiling, nodding, and steering the conversation elsewhere as fast as possible. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said once, folding her arms like she'd just won a debate. "The house is mine now. It's done. Why are you still making this a thing?" Her tone was light, almost casual, as if the years of me quietly paying the mortgage were a distant memory, irrelevant and inconvenient. It stung. It wasn't just that she was indifferent, it was the way she made my sacrifices invisible, like I'd been some background noise in her life. I pushed harder. "Don't you think it's unfair? You know I helped keep the house afloat." She shrugged, eyes flickering briefly with irritation. "Look, I didn't ask for this. I didn't sign any papers. This is between them and me, not you." It was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Every time I made a point, she sidestepped, spun it around, or shut down. There were moments when I caught glimpses of something beneath the surface, a flicker of guilt or maybe regret, but it was quickly buried under layers of self-preservation. She was playing her role perfectly. The oblivious beneficiary, the innocent daughter caught in the middle of a family misunderstanding. Our conversations became a cycle of frustration, each one ending with me feeling smaller and her more untouchable. I realized that she wasn't just defending her claim to the house. She was defending her position in the family, her version of the truth, and the comfort that came with it. What hurt most was how easily she dismissed our shared history, the memories, the late night talks, the moments when I thought we were on the same team. It became clear that this wasn't just about property or money. It was about power, control, and the invisible lines families draw to protect their own. And as I watched her step into the house that should have been ours both, I knew I had to find my own way to reclaim what was taken, not just for me, but for the truth of our story. After the exhausting rounds of conversations, dodges, and cold shoulders, I realized that simply hoping for fairness wasn't going to cut it. If I wanted justice, or at least my version of it, I had to get strategic. Revenge, as cliche as it sounds, started to look less like a petty game and more like a necessary act of reclaiming my dignity. I began sketching out a plan, not a furious, shouty confrontation, but a calculated, slow burn kind of revenge. Think chess, not checkers. Something that would make my parents and sister sit up and actually notice me, the one who had been there all along, holding everything together quietly. First, I gathered every piece of financial evidence I could find. Bank statements, mortgage payments, emails, the hard facts that no one could dispute, proof that I'd been the silent partner in this whole arrangement, even if the legal papers said otherwise. Next, I started researching my rights, family laws, and what options might be open to me. It wasn't about immediately taking legal action. That felt cold and final. No, this was about setting the stage for a reckoning that would force a conversation nobody wanted to have. I also thought about the emotional angle. Revenge isn't just about money or property. It's about making people feel the impact of their choices. So I planned subtle moves, small, pointed reminders that I was here, I mattered, and that their decision hadn't gone unnoticed. I imagined moments where a carefully timed question or comment would unsettle the comfortable silence, where I could inject truth wrapped in a sarcastic smile. Something like, "Funny how the mortgage payments I made didn't earn me a thank you, but the house gets handed over anyway. Must be a family tradition." But beneath all that, there was a lesson I held close. Revenge isn't just about payback. It's about reclaiming your story, your power, and your sense of self when those you love try to erase you. As I laid out my plan, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't a victim. I was a player now, and the game was just beginning. I knew going in that storming into the family living room, yelling about mortgage payments and betrayal would only close doors, not open them. So I started with the subtle stuff, small, calculated moves designed to remind everyone I wasn't invisible anymore, without outright hostility. Think of it as guerrilla warfare in the family arena. First, I began dropping casual mentions of the mortgage payments in conversations, always with a wry smile, like, "Funny how I've been keeping the lights on around here, huh?" The kind of comment that's light enough to be overlooked by the casual listener, but heavy enough to set off a ping in the minds of those who needed to hear it. I also started getting more involved in decisions about the house. Suddenly, I was the one asking about repairs, budgeting for maintenance, and even suggesting changes. It was subtle, but it carved out space for me where there hadn't been any. At family gatherings, I became the quiet observer, watching for cracks in their stories or slips that revealed how uncomfortable my presence made them. Sometimes, I'd throw in a sarcastic remark when the mood was right, just enough to unsettle without sparking a fight. Like mentioning a family investment in a way that implied more than just money. I also kept up my own life, career, friends, hobbies, but made sure that every success was visible, a reminder that I was thriving despite the drama. It wasn't revenge in the classic sense. It was reclaiming my narrative and showing that I wasn't defined by their choices. At the same time, I made sure to avoid burning bridges. Family is complicated, and as much as I wanted to shake the foundations, I also wanted to leave room for reconciliation, or at least respect. Those small, deliberate acts shifted the dynamic slowly. People began to notice the quiet force I'd become, the one who no longer accepted being sidelined. And somewhere along the way, I realized that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's steady, confident, and impossible to ignore. Family gatherings, once places of casual warmth and laughter, transformed into tense battlegrounds where every glance and comment felt like a calculated move. Suddenly, those familiar faces seemed to wear masks, some subtle, others barely hiding their resentment or guilt. And there I was, a quiet storm, watching, waiting, and carefully navigating these charged moments. Each holiday or birthday became a minefield of unspoken tensions. The usual chatter about weather, work, or plans for the weekend was laced with underlying messages. I noticed how my presence disrupted the carefully balanced family dynamics, how my sister's polite smiles sometimes flickered with discomfort. My parents tried to maintain the peace, but the cracks were showing. One Thanksgiving, for example, the conversation took a sharp turn when I casually mentioned an upcoming expense related to the house. My sister's fork paused midair, eyes narrowing just enough to betray her calm exterior. Mom quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Everyone was acutely aware that the house and the years of mortgage payments were a silent elephant in the room. Sometimes my parents would give me quick, apologetic looks when they thought I wasn't watching. Moments that spoke louder than any words about their regret, guilt, or simply the discomfort of a situation they'd created. I found myself becoming more patient, more observant. Instead of explosive arguments, I chose to respond with subtle sarcasm, pointed comments, and an unyielding calm that unsettled them more than any outburst ever could. Like mentioning, it's funny how some investments pay off in cash and others pay off in family drama. The tension was palpable, but it was also a strange kind of victory. I was no longer invisible. I was a force they had to acknowledge, even if begrudgingly. These gatherings reminded me that family isn't always about harmony. Sometimes it's about standing your ground in the storm, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. And trust me, it got uncomfortable. Just when I thought I was navigating this mess alone, life threw me a lifeline in the form of unexpected allies. It turns out, family drama has a funny way of revealing who's really on your side, and sometimes they're the people you least expect. One afternoon, while venting to a distant cousin over coffee, I mentioned the house situation almost in passing. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a juicy secret. "You're not the only one who feels like the family's been unfair," she said. "There's been talk about this for years behind closed doors." Suddenly, I wasn't alone. She introduced me to a few other relatives who had quietly witnessed the imbalance but had been hesitant to speak up. Their support wasn't about taking sides in a messy fight, it was about acknowledging what was right and giving me the emotional backup I desperately needed. Friends, too, became an unexpected source of strength. Some shared their own stories of family betrayals and betrayals, reminding me that I wasn't the first to face such challenges and certainly wouldn't be the last. They helped me see my situation through clearer eyes, free from the haze of hurt and anger. This network of support didn't just bolster my confidence, it gave me new perspectives on how to approach the situation. They offered practical advice, emotional encouragement, and sometimes just a listening ear when I needed to vent without judgment. With their help, I started to feel less isolated and more empowered. It wasn't about rallying a battalion for war. It was about building a small, steady foundation of understanding and support. Sometimes the family you choose can be just as important as the one you're born into. And in this tangled web of betrayal and loyalty, I was finally finding my footing. After all the quiet moves, the careful planning, and the mounting tension, the day finally came when I knew I had to face them directly. No more sidestepping or subtle digs. It was time for a confrontation that would either break us all or force some painful truths into the open. We were gathered for what was supposed to be a casual Sunday brunch. The sunlight streamed through the windows, birds chirped outside, and for a moment, the scene looked like any ordinary family meal. But beneath that calm surface, my resolve was solidifying. I cleared my throat and said, "I want to talk about the house, the mortgage payments, the ownership, everything." The room stiffened. My sister's eyes flicked to our parents, who exchanged uncomfortable glances. I laid out the facts, calmly but firmly. The years I'd paid the mortgage, the sacrifices I'd made, and the decision they'd taken without my knowledge. I wasn't there to yell or accuse, I wanted them to see the reality I'd lived. Dad shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. Mom's expression was unreadable, a mix of sadness and regret. My sister sat back, arms crossed, the usual smile replaced by something sharper, defensive. "I don't expect an apology," I continued, "but I do want honesty. Why was I left out of this? Why was my contribution ignored?" The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Then Mom spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "We wanted to protect you from the stress, from the conflict. It wasn't easy, but we thought it was best for everyone." Protect me," I echoed, disbelief flooding my voice. "By taking everything I worked for and handing it over to her." My sister finally spoke up, her voice icy but controlled. "You weren't the one living here every day. This house is my home." Her words hit me hard, but instead of anger, I felt a strange clarity. The family I thought I knew was fractured, but maybe this confrontation was the first step toward something real. It wasn't a clean victory, nothing about this ever would be. But in that moment, the masks came off and the truth was out. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Aftermath. How relationships shift and what you gain or lose. The days and weeks following that confrontation felt like walking through a foggy aftermath of a storm. The family dynamics I once took for granted had shifted, some relationships fractured, others quietly realigned. The air was thick with unresolved feelings, and every interaction seemed loaded with new meaning. My parents became quieter around me, their usual warmth replaced by a cautious distance. It was as if they were grappling with guilt and uncertainty, unsure how to bridge the gap that had opened so suddenly. I sensed their regret, but it wasn't enough to undo the years of silence and exclusion. My sister, on the other hand, oscillated between defensiveness and awkward attempts at reconciliation. There were moments when our old rapport flickered briefly, shared jokes, a glance that recalled better times, but mostly, a wall stood firm between us. The house remained hers, but the emotional home we once shared felt fractured. For me, this period was a painful but necessary reckoning. I had lost the comfortable illusion of family unity, but I gained a clearer sense of my own worth and boundaries. No longer invisible, I was learning to speak up, to demand respect, and to recognize when love isn't enough to justify sacrifice without recognition. I also realized that some losses are bittersweet. While I mourned what could have been, a family that acknowledged my efforts and shared its blessings fairly, I also embraced the freedom to define my own path. The experience, as harsh as it was, became a catalyst for growth. Friends and newfound allies provided the support and perspective I needed to navigate this new landscape. Their presence reminded me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands by you when the dust settles. And while the scars remain, they serve as a reminder that resilience often rises from the deepest wounds. After the dust settled, I realized that the story wasn't just about a house or unpaid debts. It was about reclaiming my life. The silence that once felt suffocating began to give way to a quiet peace, one built on the foundation of hard-earned strength and lessons learned the hard way. I stopped waiting for apologies or fairness from those who had taken my sacrifices for granted. Instead, I focused on building my own future, brick by brick, free from the shadows of resentment. It wasn't easy. Some days still stung, memories flashed uninvited, and the weight of lost trust lingered like an unwelcome guest. But with every step forward, I felt lighter, more whole. Surprisingly, life threw in an unexpected twist. One day, out of the blue, my sister reached out, not with entitlement or defense, but with a tentative olive branch. She admitted her own guilt, her own regrets, and for the first time, we talked, not as adversaries, but as siblings trying to rebuild something real. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The house stayed hers, but what changed was the story we told each other going forward. Forgiveness crept in slowly, wrapped in humor, honesty, and a newfound respect for boundaries. Looking back, I can't help but smirk at the irony. The very thing that tore us apart, the house, became the catalyst for honesty and growth we never expected. Sometimes revenge isn't about winning, it's about waking up. And now, as I share this story with you, I hope it serves as a reminder. Loyalty is precious, sacrifice deserves recognition, and sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most unexpected victories. So here's to moving on, standing tall, and finding the humor in even the darkest family drama. The quiet moments after a storm often hold the most profound truths. As the anger and confusion fade, what remains is the space for healing, reflection, and growth. Family, with all its messy imperfections, teaches us resilience in ways few other relationships can. In reclaiming my story, I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the gentle acts of forgiveness, in the courage to set boundaries, and in the humor that softens the hardest truths. Life rarely offers neat resolutions, but it gives us the chance to rewrite our narratives, sometimes with a smirk and a nod to the chaos that shaped us. So if you're tangled in your own story of betrayal or hurt, remember, you're not alone. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, on your own terms.